welcome to episode 5 of The Power of Dance, Dance in the Workplace. So we're really looking forward to discussing how we can integrate dance into the workplace and gain all the benefits that we know you can get from dance and movement. But it can be a tricky thing to implement. So welcome again, Peter and Darcey. So we've got Dr. Peter Lovatt and Dame Darcey Bussell. And we're just going to be chatting today about what we think about why we think we need it and how we can implement it into the workplace. So why do we need dance in the workplace?
Go, Peter.
Okay. Well, I see it that so the situation in the workplace is quite a unique one. So in the modern workplace, we have a restricted set of movements. So we have to work within certain constraints physically. And those are kind of, some we're sitting, we're standing, but we also have a kind of restricted set of mental constraints as well. So we're restricted mentally. The second problem is that we have some very repetitive movements which are associated with our work. At the moment, we're either hunched over a computer and we're typing away, or we're serving someone, or we're walking somewhere, or we're standing up. And the third thing is then there's some psychological stresses associated with the workplace in terms of performance outcomes and in terms of achieving, having collaboration with your work colleagues and creating something as a whole. So the situation, I think, is quite a hotbed for problems. And of course, this then leads to problems with the body. Now, do you mind if I just rattle through something for a couple of minutes? Is that all right? Okay, so just to kind of set this problem up.
I love it.
Here's our situation. Now, the problem is then, we have that range of movement which is challenged. It was thought in the United States in 2001 that 1.8 million people reported musculoskeletal disorders, and 600,000 of those people caused them to miss time off work. And this was thought to cost the American economy back then over $9 billion. Now, of course, that's just the physical side, the physical cost of this. But then if you bring the psychological elements into it as well, the cost is much greater and the prevalence is much more pervasive. Now, this is a very old problem. We might see it as a modern problem, but it's not. As far back as 1713, so 300 years ago, there was a chap called Bernardino Ramazzini who looked at the diseases of works. In Latin, it was called De Morbis Artificus Diatriba. I think that's how you say it, I'm not sure. And what he was really saying is that different professions lead to these different problems of the body. And so, for instance, he wrote, 1713, he wrote this. He said, the maladies that affect the clerk, the person sitting down doing writing, there are 3 causes. There's the constant sitting, there's the repetitive writing, and there's the stress to make sure you get it right. So here's the problem. We have this problem in the modern workplace that the way we move our body can have a negative impact on our physical and our psychological and our team working. And of course, what we know is that when we get people moving, when we break them away from that, we can lead to these amazing benefits. So I've worked, for instance, in different sectors, in the creative sector with people like Saatchi and Saatchi, in the banking sector with people like Deutsche Bank, the automotive industry with people like Volkswagen, and in the tech industry with companies like Qualtrics. And what we find is that when we introduce movement into the workplace and we change the movement, then amazing things happen. So the first thing we always do is to find new ways of moving in the workplace. So it's breaking away from those habits of movement in the workplace and finding new ways of moving, whether it's at your desk, whether it's between workstations, whatever it is. And we know there are 2 benefits to that. One, it breaks up the long periods of sitting or standing. And 2, we have an increase in movement repertoire. Now, teaching people how to move is really important because people get so intimidated by moving that we, people in the movement industry, need to help people to find new ways of moving which are appropriate to their environment. And then, of course, that leads to stress release, increase in social bonding, increase in creative thinking, and increase in communication. So that's the context for me. For me, that workplace, there's a particular problem, and we, as the people involved in the movement and dance industry, can help to overcome some of those problems, which leads to a decrease in number of days off, an increase in productivity, and increase in well-being.
Yeah, it is all about repetition, isn't it? I mean, even as a dancer, especially for me as a classical dancer, the repetition of the same movements, we did have to change them because you'll constantly get ITB, tightness, and different tightnesses because of that style of dance. But it is about variety, isn't it? And constantly changing the movement so that you don't get those repetitive strain injuries and also just looking at a screen, just kind of turning and looking around you and making sure that you do that at regular kind of paces during, I suppose, your hour, when you're trying to get a meeting done online or a work, finish off a project or something. For me, it totally makes sense. I mean, everything you say, it's like, why haven't we even incorporated this? The only problem I find is music, because I put the two together. So if you're going to do movement exercises or related dance exercises into the workspace, how do you complement that with music? Because you can't have an office with everybody listening to different pieces of music as they get up and do their activity. I was thinking, I wonder how we overcome that, because obviously music is also very personal. And of course, there's many pieces of music that will work with, one style of dance as well.
I mean, I guess if we had, would that lead to a need to have a cultural change? Because if you have music, we'd have headphones now in the workplace. And it's, for me, I think it's that sense that if we have the music in our headphones, then we can move to that music. But people seem embarrassed about moving to their only music they can hear. But if we can mainline the music into their ears so nobody else can hear it, but then help them overcome some of those inhibitions to help them moving their body. Even that thing of being, I worked in an office once where we would all be sat, there was an open plan office, it was a tech company, and we'd all be working. And then suddenly somebody would get up and walk to go to the bathroom or to leave. And everybody would just stare at them as they walked across the office floor. And it was this distraction of people moving. So people they don't want to be looked at. They're sometimes intimidated by the prospect of having a bit of a shimmy at the workplace or standing up and rolling their shoulders around. And I think we kind of need to overcome that somehow.
I do. There's a few barriers. I worked in a big corporate office where we used to have a radio on quite quietly, but if the song came on that people loved, you could just see everyone start to move and start to groove until it changed and the big boss came in and said, no more radios. But you could feel the morale just completely, it was working in silence. You weren't allowed headphones either. And the morale just dropped. And that's just from having music on very quietly in the background. So I think it is about trying to find a way to, like you said, give people the confidence that it's okay to move. And there seems to be so many inhibitions around it.
I suppose there'd also have to be, if you had an office space and you were thinking about music and how everybody had their break, had their time to move, whether there was a space to go and move in, so that it wasn't feeling like it was intrusive on other people's focus and attention of the work that they were doing at that time within that large office space. Or would it be compatible that they could actually just get up in front of their screen, just do a couple of moves, loosen off the shoulders, as Peter always does, I love when you do this all the time, and something like that. But it will be a distraction. And it's all very well to say, oh no, if it becomes the norm, we'd be able to focus. I don't think generally we would. I think there has to be a space where you go and dance. Like there used to be in the olden days in offices, the smoking room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I know it's not a great example.
No, but some of them have gyms. They have a canteen.
Have a little dance room. I mean, my husband's, worked in the city for 20 years, and they were really wise to have sort of a Pilates room come at hand. And also they had a table tennis table in the room. So it was a release of tension when you played table tennis and focused on something totally different. But of course, there was rules and regulations of how long you could play table tennis for or how long you were going to be in the Pilates room for. But my gosh, it changed the way he worked and how better he felt when he used to come home as well.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't it be great, Darcey and Giselle, if we could create something like a boogie box? Now, let's imagine this boogie box. It's in an office space, like that Pilates room, but you go in and there's a massive screen. Maybe on 2 of the walls or 3 of the walls, there's a giant screen from floor to ceiling. and it's a soundproof booth, and there's a big loudspeaker in there, so it can be loud if you want it to. And then you go in and you have an immersive dance experience. So you might go in with a certain mood. You might input a mood onto the computer. You might say, I'm feeling like this. Or you might say, I want to feel like that. Or I want to achieve this. I need to be calm, or I need to be excited, or something. And then we then come on those big screens, or you come on the big screens, and we guide people through the movement, either by guiding them through some structured exercise, or we guide them through some improvised movements, or suddenly on the screen, there's 25 people on the screen, and we're all just boogieing as if we're in a nightclub, or we're in Copacabana or something. And
amazing.
This thing, people could come into the boogie box then during the working day for a couple of minutes, boom, and leave again. And nobody would know what they did in there at all. There'd be no embarrassment.
I hope you've patented that idea, Peter. Copyright right here.
I think that's, we've got it decided. There's going to be a boogie box, and we'll have a list of playlists for different themes. And also you could have different colors within that room. But I'm a little bit worried that we might have too much fun.
But it's doable. I mean, you know, karaoke in some countries is such an integral part of their business networking, of their socializing, combining the two together. And there are no inhibitions there. That's just what they do. And it's a really important thing for them. It would be so good. And I know there is a silent disco company. There's a guy called Guru Disco, I think he might be called. But they do walking tours, you know, but watching people dance and having a great time just makes you smile. It makes you happy. So
you're not laughing at them.
No, it's because you can see how much fun they're having.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we do stuff. I do a lot of events for corporates where I speak at conferences. Now, some of these are very large-scale conferences, so there might be 10,000 people in the audience. Now, these corporate conferences, they last all day long. So people arrive there at 8 in the morning. They don't leave their seats really until sort of 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And what I do some talking in the afternoon, and then I get them moving. And it's amazing to see them moving, because you see a room of people and their energy levels are getting lower and lower and lower throughout the day. And of course, their concentration levels are reducing as well. And their engagement with the material is reducing, and their engagement with one another is reducing. And if I get them moving, even just for 2 or 3 minutes, get them moving their arms, standing up. This is in packed theatre style seating. So there's hardly any space at all, but we can get people moving, put some music on, raise the energy levels right up. And then you can literally feel it in the room with people's energy levels up. People start engaging more, they're more talkative with one another, and they're more collaborative. So I think sometimes all we need is a couple of minutes of these. And you're right, that sense of if everyone's doing it, like in the silent discos where people have got headphones on. And it's interesting you talk about silent discos, because many conferences now in the States are now having multiple sessions in the same room. So they might be having speaker 1 on one side of the room, speaker 2 on the other, and speaker 3 on the other. And all of the delegates are wearing different pair of headphones, and they're tuning in to one of 3 or 4 speakers. And of course, what's wonderful in that environment is that as soon as you see one of the groups getting up and moving, then all the other groups look at them, and it creates a buzz in the room. It really does change the dynamics hugely when you get people moving.
Wow, that's extraordinary. I can't even imagine, if that would even work here, having 3 conferences in one space. That's amazing. But it just shows you that people can focus, I suppose. That maybe I'm incorrect in saying that maybe in an office space, I suppose if you were at your desk and you had your earphones connected to your screen and the movements came up, the music came up, people might get used to the idea of everybody moving in their space slightly differently and not be distracted if it became the norm. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, for you, Darcey, when obviously your job was mainly physical and you were used to moving all the time, and now you run a business, you must have days where you are, in front of the computer. How does that make you feel when you've had a day just concentrating?
Well, I think it's I find it very difficult to be in front of a computer. I think because most of my life I have always moved, and I use my body to express how I feel and everything. So to not do that, I feel incredibly uncomfortable in front of a computer. I hate sitting for too long. I suppose I'm ultra sensitive about how my body feels as well, because I've always danced and always moved. So when I don't move for a couple of hours, I can feel my hips seizing up. I feel like I start getting fidgety. I can't, it's horrible. And I think it's just because what I've done all my life as a dancer. So I have to get up. And also, as you said, Peter, I can't just focus for that length of time, because movement is such a natural thing, part of my body, that I have to get up. I have to go for a walk around the house, or I even have to stretch. So even if I'm sitting on a plane or on a train, I suddenly see myself stretching without even thinking, because of just sensing how stiff I'm becoming. And it's really annoying for other people, I'm sure, to suddenly see me. I know my friends, I drive them a bit crazy. But I just see it essential. And if I have a week without any sort of exercise and anything, my whole energy levels, as being positive about things, about being lifted or enlightening or inspired by things, all dull because I haven't moved. I'm suddenly more alive as soon as I've moved. Everything is awakened, as we were talking about, I think in one of our first series. The senses come alive as soon as you move. So it totally makes sense to me. I just find it crazy that people have to sit in front of a computer for such a long time. I think that maybe one of the best ideas possibly is, that everybody goes, I need a cup of tea to revive myself. Well, if they're going to go and get a cup of tea, they have to then go to the boogie room and have a shake up.
Yeah.
So if any in the workspace, if any individual wants to go and get that cup of tea, they have to. It's part of the rules. They have to go to the boogie room and do that first, and then come back. And then I think there'll have to be a regulated, 4 or 3 times a day that they're allowed to do that, or they might realize they're having too much fun.
But that's the thing, it's a short burst, isn't it? You don't need to do an hour's dance class to get the benefits. So it is just maybe one track, one song, which is 3 minutes of your day to get the endorphins released. I mean, Peter, you must see that in some of the proof that you've been researching.
Absolutely, yeah. So some of the research says that you can get the benefits from a short period of time. And then the idea is not just to do that for once a week, but to make that part of your daily life. So to have those 2 or 3 minute bursts of movement throughout the day and then throughout the week. So it does become an essential part. What we know from the scientific research is that is enough to keep those endorphin levels high, and to keep your concentration levels, and to keep the interpersonal engagement different. And the idea is to vary the movement. If you wanted to be cognitively sharp, you wouldn't only do Sudoku puzzles. You do lots of different mental exercises to keep yourself mentally sharp. And the same with movement. We need that variety of movement. And the problem is, because we have these things called schemas, which are ways of thinking or ways of behaviors in our head, they limit our thinking and they limit our movement. And when you look at the variety of movement patterns you see normal people doing every day, they do the same movements over and over again. And it isn't just task related. It might be walking to the bus stop, or going to the car, or just sitting down. And Darcey, I bet when you're on an aeroplane and you start those movements off, I bet there are some people who are thinking, oh, I'd be too embarrassed to move. But I bet there are lots of people saying, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I knew what to do. Or I wish it was acceptable for me just to go big stretch and over in the arm.
People. That's why education is so important when you start young, to break those inhibitions so that they don't kick in with society, and that we are able. I mean, I suppose it was. Do you remember when people first started talking aloud when they were on their phone?
Oh, yes.
How embarrassing that was when it first started. So I think this will be exactly the same. If we could adapt quickly and realize that certain movements, it's like, I take the dogs for a walk. I can't help but then start doing other movements instead of just walking. And people do stare at you and go, is she feeling all right? I wonder if she's okay. Like that. Have I suddenly strained something? Why I'm suddenly doing a different movement as I'm walking the dogs. But, it is the same as that, isn't it? We could change, we don't mind people talking aloud or talking to themselves as they're walking along, because we realize that they're on their phone, But it was rather odd to start with.
Yeah. It's funny, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I twisted my ankle on the beach. I was walking down the beach, and it was the pebbly part of the beach, and I twisted my ankle. And some friends were about 100 yards away walking towards me, and they thought that I was dancing. and I was all over the place going, oh, and it was so painful. I got, and I couldn't stand up, and I was, and I couldn't get my footing, so I was on pebbles, and then they just thought I was having a boogie. So they were smiling at me, going, well, hi.
Yes. Well, I suppose they know you, Peter, and they know that you're constantly having
But it's funny, we're talking about this sort of movement in relation to workplace and stuff. There's an interesting study looking at burnout and movement. So, of course, in modern society, we work such long hours that the experiences of burnout, of constantly working, constantly doing it, never leaving our computer, never putting the work down. A study that came out in 2018 showed that when people experience burnout, it has a negative impact on their movement. And one of the things they found was that people's range of movements become lesser and lesser and lesser. So they become doing more repetitive movements over and over and over again, just like sitting at the computer and staring. Now, of course, the consequence of that is, so the burnout leads to this change in movement pattern. And one of their explanations for that was that when we can no longer think about a variety of things, so when our thinking dulls and we lose the variety of thinking, then of course this is indicative in our movements too. Now, this is a symptom of the burnout. And of course, what we think is, if we can increase people's movement ranges, it might prevent burnout or slow down the onset of burnout, because the wider range of movements will help people to have a wider range of thoughts and strategies and things to do. There's a relationship between movement and thinking, clearly. And that increased range of thinking might prevent people from spending too long obsessing over the same task and then experiencing burnout.
So, this totally makes sense, Peter, because Giselle, I don't know if you've heard, there is a guru yoga guy, living on a mountain very high up, and he said, one of the main important things about having this physical body is that every joint has to be oiled. And if you just gave yourself, morning and evening, an ability to oil every joint, and it's oiling every joint is not about, eating something. It's about actually circling that joint in the ways it should move, and all the different ways a shoulder moves to an elbow, to a wrist, to the fingers, to the knees, to every joint. If we moved every joint, we wouldn't get all of those injuries or problems as we age. I mean, I know, there's the science is there. Giselle, we all know this, but we don't do it. We just don't do it. And if we understand, and then, like yoga's become the norm now, before we thought it was some hippie kind of meditation, very strange. But of course, everybody's seeing the benefits of making sure that every joint is oiled. And then you don't get all these problems with age and posture problems and stuff, because you are thinking about every joint in your body. And it's that, our body is there to move, isn't it? So if we miss out this opportunity, and I'm so glad we're talking about it, that this could be part of a working life, not just your well-being for your lifestyle. This is a part of working life, that we oiled every joint and that we did it with music. I mean, how different, as we all know, would we feel? So we just got to get it in there, haven't we?
Yeah.
Well, we would love to hear from some companies if anyone has tried anything like this, if they've seen the benefits of dance. But if not, we would like to hear from a company who would like to try this. And we would come to you and see if we can put something into practice. So please do get in touch. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time here, unless anyone has any last words on the workplace.
Well, let's move. Let's practice what we preach. Let's groove.
Let's get moving.
Let's groove. And you heard it first.
Yeah. We'll have to say that Peter and Darcey will come into your workplace and make sure you get moving and create some sort of routine to your office. And make it enjoyable.
Brilliant. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me again, Dr. Peter Lovatt and Dame Darcey Bussell. And we will see you next time for episode 6 of The Power of Dance.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.